Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Before the 90 days, another season. Let's watch and see who these people are.
If it's different, I don't want you to be heartbroken.
This is my thing. I'm 34 years old. You know, I mean, I've tried all different flavors of men. White to black to Mexican and American men. They can't even keep up a good morning text for a month. With Hamza, I love the consistency that he has with me.
Okay, so there's a few things I'll say. One is that if things work out with Hamza, then great. You know, and it seems like they like each other, and maybe things will work out. So there's that. And I suppose whatever path led them together, then that's, you know, all's well that ends well. But one of the things she's saying is, she's saying, I've tried Mexican, American, I've tried da-da-da, and it didn't work out. Okay, I wouldn't assume that it's because of nationality that it didn't work out. I would assume that it was bad luck, or something about the way I choose people, or something about where I look for people, something about me that is triggering to other people, or I don't know. That would be my first assumption, instead of like, well, let's see. You know, I'm 34 years old and I've had all these failed relationships. What's the pattern here? Well, I dated one Mexican, so that didn't work. So let's write off all Mexicans. Dated a white American guy, that didn't work out. So let's never date another white American guy again. I mean, like I said, if things work out with Hamza, then great. But we're also hearing that these men couldn't keep up with a morning check-in text. I can't remember the phrase she used, but that sounds like a preoccupied thing. I don't know. We'll call it, it's not even really a yellow flag. It's like a off-white flag, that when you are frustrated with lack of texting back, lack of contact back, particularly if it's not, you know, if you turn to someone and say, how's it going? And they just don't even respond, then that's one thing. It's another thing to like, okay, I'm texting, they better text me back, instead of like, hey, I'm just reaching out. And if they get back to me, but I wanted, so there are different kind of texts, right? And if you just want to send a note, just like, hey, thinking of you, that's one, you know, it's great. It's just a little message that you're sending to someone. It's another thing to be like, hey, thinking of you. And in your mind, you're like, you better text me back right away. You know, so it's not really like I love you. It's, do you love me kind of a text. And unless you're pretty explicit about that and flexible to other people's lives, then, you know, you're going to be frustrated with that. And that's kind of a preoccupied thing, because for preoccupied people, they're preoccupied. They're very frequently thinking, is this relationship good? Is this person going to leave me? And that can result in a lot of texting these days. I mean, it's interesting because as a therapist for 25 years, I was a therapist for a long time with preoccupied clients prior to texting. And when texting came along, I just started hearing the same thing from the preoccupied people. And we'll see that on the show, you know, Ariella.
That I have not experienced with anyone else.
Would you marry somebody that you'd never met?
Never. But I think for Memphis, there's an empty piece in her heart that's missing. And when her mind and her heart is set up on something, she reaches out and goes for it without even thinking.
All right, so her friend is saying that she can be impulsive regarding relationships. This is also kind of indicative of preoccupied attachment. Could even be indicative of just insecure attachment in general. I don't know. Some people are just really impulsive in this way, and there's nothing necessarily pathological about it or different about it. But you could imagine if you have low self-esteem, if you have desperation, if you have dependency issues, then you might push yourself into relationships quicker than that, you know, would be healthy for you. And it sounds like her friend is saying she has a pattern of this. I don't know what that exactly means, but it's another piece of data we can pay attention to. The other thing that we'll pay attention to is that she's never met him in person, and they don't speak each other's language. She does not speak his language. She does not speak her language. And they've only been video chatting. And she's like, yep, ready to get married. And again, if it works out, then great. And maybe she just knows because of the interactions that she's had. But, after watching the show, we understand that that's a little impulsive. And I'm guessing would be indicative of something regarding attachment insecurity that's causing her this to be in denial of reality and to just take it slow. Like, hey, haven't met him in person. Let's try to learn each other's language. Let's see how things go. Instead of, I've never met him in person. We're getting married.
I do. But it's like, I'm going to do what I want to do regardless.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this is right in my gut and in my heart.
So who knows? But that's kind of an undifferentiated point of view. Like, regardless of the way this looks, regardless of all logic, it feels right for me, and so I'm going to do it. Now, of course, when it comes to marriage, it is a lot of feeling. It is a lot of like, do I want this? Do I feel good around this person? Does this person make me feel like a worthy human being? Am I in love? Do I want to be? It's a lot of gut knowledge, a lot of gut awareness, if you will. But to completely disregard any logic around this would be allowing your feelings to cloud your judgment. You need both. You need your feelings and you need your judgment to work together. That's differentiation.
And mother and I has been complicated because she wasn't always there for me when I was younger.
All right, interesting. So I always appreciate learning at least something about their childhoods, which can help us learn about their, explain potentially their behaviors, because we're trying to triangulate the traumas and what they went through. And so for her, she's talking about how her relationship with her mom is complicated because her mom wasn't always there for her. That can absolutely be a breeding ground for preoccupied attachment. So we've seen two pieces of evidence pointing that direction. To be specific, and I don't know about her, there's just two tiny little pieces of data, but when you're a child and you're 0 to 5 and you get love sometimes and then all of a sudden it just dries up. Because as a child, you're really concerned about, is my parent there for me? Particularly when you need them. Sometimes as kids, you're 3 years old, you're playing, and you're focused on that. And then all of a sudden something will happen, something scary will happen, or you'll be hungry or something. And that's when you look up. And if you can signal, cry or hey, and your parent notices you and attunes to you, then that reassures you so that you can venture off into the world for longer periods of time. And as you age, you're able to go to kindergarten all day long, and then you're in 5th grade and you can go on a trip with some other friends for a couple of days, and then when you're 25, you can move out of the house, that kind of thing. And so these are important experiences that are age appropriate, but it begins when we're young and we're like, oh, are you there? And then the attunement has to be, sufficient. So if sometimes the attunement is there and then other times it's not, one of the strategies that children will develop is what we call preoccupied attachment or anxious attachment, which is subconsciously developed. It's not a conscious choice that children will make, and it's neurological in that they will amp up their emotional. So when, say, you turn and you're like, oh, where's mom? And then you're like, and you feel this fear of like, I'm alone. And then and that motivates crying and screaming. And then your mom comes around the corner and tends to you. You're like, oh, okay. So that's a good situation. I mean, relatively. Now, if they're there sometimes and not other times, and you look, you're like, ooh, where's mom? And you're like, oh, I feel the fear of like, I'm alone. And then you cry and no one comes. And you're like, and then you go, and then you really cry. You just start screaming, where are you? And then finally someone comes. So what that rewards to a child, especially if you repeat this over time, is the child learns neurologically, the way I get my needs met is to express attachment loss 10 times bigger than I would naturally. And again, this is all subconscious. It's not something the child goes, "Oh, I have to scream at this decibel." It's all just like trial and error. And then when something works, it's like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's the key." So the next, you do that for a year, and then the child is now 3 years old, and they look around. And I'm giving that example, but there are other examples too. Like you could be right next to your parent and signal that you're sad or annoyed or uncomfortable. And if the parent is preoccupied with something else, or struggling with something, they might be sitting right next to you and still not really notice, or they might not attune to you well. They might notice you, but they overreact. Like, how come you're always, complaining all the time? And you learn that in order to garner compassion from your parents, you have to really fall apart. To cry a little bit is to get chastised, but to cry a lot is to get, okay, fine, this child's driving me nuts, I have to attend to it. So what it does is it locks in this neurological reward system of feel emotions 10 times bigger, especially loss emotions, and express them 10 times bigger. Feel them 10 times bigger, which will cause you to express them 10 times bigger. And this is what we call preoccupied attachment, which is you're an adult and someone does, you text. One, you're just like you're frequently hyper vigilant about, are we in a relationship? Is this relationship good? Do you love me? Are we close? Because there's this paranoia of just like at any moment it could just fly away from me, because that's what it was like growing up. She's talking about that. And then you text, not as an expression of affection, but as a desperation. For preoccupied people, and I've treated many preoccupied people, sometimes 90% or 100% of their behavior in a relationship in terms of bidding for love and connection is all anxiety based. What we're hoping for is a situation where you can relax and just have an upwelling of love and express that love, instead of, I need to express this love because then that gets them to love me back, and because I can't be alone. It's that kind of desperation instead of it just being from the heart. Now, preoccupied people can't just decide to do that. They have to have awareness and corrective experiences so that they believe that people aren't going to fly away from it at any moment. It's sort of like if you weren't allowed to drink water very much. That clean water was really hard to find, and for years. And so whenever you came across clean water, you'd be like, oh, and you would hide it and be like, oh my God. And you'd always be looking for clean water. Like, is there any clean water around here? And then you come to an area, a community where there's free flowing clean water everywhere. Well, you could imagine for that person for the first couple months that they would still be hypervigilant, like clean water. Oh, okay, there's clean water. Oh, clean water. Okay, there's clean. But over time, if you have enough clean water consistently available, you reorient. You're like, oh, there's always clean water around. I don't need to be hypervigilant about that. That's what preoccupied attachment is. And until you experience secure attachments, excuse me, in an ongoing way, and it becomes believed to your body, like you don't have to be hypervigilant anymore. People are there. You can depend on that. Until you really internalize that through experience, you're going to be hypervigilant. You're always going to be like, is someone going to leave me? Is someone going to leave me? So I don't know if that's what we're seeing, but we've seen some little indications. But I'm just so glad that she was able to be vulnerable and tell us about her, at least something about her early childhood. And good for them for rebuilding their relationship and because that can be a corrective experience as well, to go to the person, the parent who was inconsistent, and to develop an adult relationship with that person that has a bond can actually be corrective as well.
I believe that Hamza may have an ulterior motive. He could be just trying to get over to the States with this woman who can take care of him. It's time for her to really understand what risk she's putting herself in.
So, of course, as a majority of the family members are like on this show, is they're concerned about their family member. Memphis's mom is worried about her daughter, that her daughter is going to be taken advantage of, that her daughter is going to be hurt by this other man. And that's a good impulse of just like, I love my daughter and I don't want her to be hurt. But it has to be balanced with, well, my daughter's a grown woman, and she's smart, and she'll, she's capable of making her own life and making her own mistakes, and I'm not gonna, So let's see how the mom deals with this, because sometimes we see different balances here. How do you balance your concern for someone while also not hurting them in the process? Let's see what happens.
What does he do?
Heating and cooling.
Heating and cooling.
I told him, when you come to America, you're getting a job.
What if that doesn't happen? This is really going to be a lot on you in the long run.
On my nurse practitioner salary, I can afford to take care of him for a little bit.
Okay, so she is competent. She has, I didn't show this clip, but I don't think she has a master's degree, I think in nursing, and she's a nurse practitioner. She earns a good living. I wonder if this is a result of her being neglected growing up. Some kids who are forced to grow up very fast become ultra competent and ultra independent. I don't know. I mean, obviously there's nothing strange about having a successful career. So, but I don't know, just wondering, I wish we knew exactly what happened, because it would help us to understand potentially how Memphis's personality developed in terms of, she says mom wasn't really there all the time for me. What was it like? What were the issues that she went through? Anyway. But so, again, let's watch how the mom reacts to this. So the mom's like, hey, he doesn't have a job now, and is he going to be a deadbeat? It's a huge, and it is. It's true. It's just like, look, you're gambling a lot here. So let's see how she manages it.
Okay, Memphis. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think from this surface, she balanced it pretty well and said, okay. I think it would have been nice if she could have said a little bit more, like, okay, well, you're a really responsible person. I respect you a lot, but I'll have to say, I'm still kind of worried. But I think she was kind of expressing that in her facial expression.
Your face.
Well, is he ready to be a stepdad? You believe with 2 kids he's never met?
That's a leap of faith that I'm taking. But he's a very genuine person, and I feel that he's everything that I've been asking for. And
so I'm a little worried about this. The mom's like, what about, is he up for being a stepdad? And she says, it's a leap of faith that I want to take. And then she says, I feel that. That, I don't know, but it sounds like they haven't talked about it directly, or at least enough. What I would hope that she would say is, you know what, we've talked about it a lot. And he, although this wasn't what he thought his life would be like, he's interacted with my kids. Because she's like, when I land, we're going to get married. This is going to happen. We're going to get engaged. We're on the fast track. So you would hope that there would be more explicit conversations around stepfatherhood and what that's going to look like and everything. The values of parenting. What if he is willing to be a stepdad, but he wants to parent in this completely different way, which wouldn't be unusual given that he's from a completely different culture. He's from Tunisia. And what's going on with Tunisia? We had Mohammed, we have Hamza, we had Zied, right? Maybe even others. It's interesting. There's certain pockets in the world that seem to, even in the United States, like San Diego and Washington State, and there's certain pockets of the world that seem to lend itself to 90 Day Fiancé storylines. Anyway, maybe it's like they're recruiters in particular. Anyway, I don't know. But we've seen this before where they are online. It's all about lovey this and oh my God, this is so great. And they never stop and have the hard conversations that really should be had in terms of discovering, are we really compatible given the entirety of our lives? So it's kind of sounds like she hasn't really. And of course, she said, we don't speak each other's language. And having a conversation about stepfatherhood would require a lot of nuance. I mean, just to even know what the word, how to say stepfather in his language. I mean, so there's some huge red flags. But who knows? Maybe things will work out.
Wanting for it. And he just really wants to like make me feel very secure.
And then you have to wonder if she were abandoned or inconsistently parented as a child, if that creates certain complexes or expectations or interjects that she's recreating. That, who knows, complete speculation here, of course, is that you have inconsistent parenting from your mom or from your caregivers growing up, and there's a lot of abandonment and a lot of disconnection, and you recreate that in your adult life as a way of trying to have a corrective experience subconsciously, or it's just a model of relationship that you're just used to, and so you recreate that with someone that kind of you have a connection with, but is doomed to fail. Certainly a lot of people have been abandoned growing up who have a string of relationships as an adult where they're like, how come I keep choosing relationships that end up abandoning me? You would think that because I was abandoned as a child, I would be averse to involving myself with anyone who would abandon me. But how come I keep doing this? It's all part of projective identification, repetition, compulsion, recreation of relationships. And so, yeah, I don't know if we're seeing something like that, but let's keep an eye on it.
I wonder sometimes if I'm looking for something in someone else that I didn't have when I was younger.
So I don't know if that's a passive statement to her mom. Just like, yeah, I don't know if I'm looking for someone to make up for the fact that I was abandoned growing up. I think that's kind of what she's saying. I don't know if that's what she's saying, but it sounds like that's kind of what she's saying. Yeah, it's interesting. So, Kyle, maybe we'll have time to go into more, but there's so much I could say about this that sometimes we're thinking we're compensating for, so you can have abandonment growing up. Let's just use that as an example. And then as an adult, you're like, you meet someone and consciously you're like, ooh, this is great because there's so many indications that this person will not abandon me. And so consciously you're thinking, I'm doing something healthy here. I had abandonment growing up, but this relationship has all these signs that I'm not going to be abandoned. So I'm looking for something to correct for something that happened in the past. But that's what the conscious mind is thinking. Subconsciously, other things are happening. And of course, relationally wise, another thing happens. So it's interesting that I think what she's saying is, this relationship I have with Hamza, there's so many signs that he's not going to abandon me, which is a healthy thing for me because I'm making up for what happened in the past. But of course, what also could be happening is either a subconscious awareness or just a compulsion to recreate the past of there's indication that he loves me. He calls me all the time. She talked about that. When I text, he calls me, he texts back. He's frequently there for me on the phone, which is exactly what I need because I need to make up for the fact that I've had a lot of abandonment in my life, a lot of neglect. But I'm going to ignore the fact that we don't speak each other's language, that our cultures are completely different. It's going to be hard for us to even see each other because of visas and the pandemic. And so I'm going to ignore all that. And all those circumstances could absolutely conspire to create an abandoning relationship, but I'm going to ignore that because I need to recreate the past. And so I'm going to consciously focus on things that are going to push me into the relationship and subconsciously deny things that will allow me to recreate the past.
Somewhat neglected or not feeling secure at times. My childhood was not stable. When I was 9, my mom was battling crack addiction. My biological father was in prison.
Okay, so we're getting some details about the abandonment. That father was in prison, probably could be drug related. There are a lot of people that are in prisons for drug possession or minor trafficking of drugs, which is, in my opinion, ridiculous. I mean, who do you want locked up in prisons? Someone who is going to kill your family member or you, break into your house and assault you, or someone who's selling crack on a corner? Who cares? So I mean, fine, make it an infraction, find people, give them treatment, but to lock them up in prison, I don't know if that's what her dad. Now, sometimes you can be in the throes of addiction that it can cause you to commit violent crimes, and those situations, in my opinion, need to be dealt with in some way. But anyway, she's talking about how her father was in prison, and of course we have a problem in our country about locking up black people. Research shows that you have the same crime and the same history of crime, and the white person does not get prison, or doesn't get as long of a prison sentence, and the black person will get a longer prison sentence. And it totally fits with all the sex or the racism in our society, that black men are seen as more savage, more animalistic, more unable to control their behavior, more dangerous. And so as a judge, when you're giving out a sentence, because of those biases, you just think, wow, that person's more of a menace to society, because not only did they do these things, but the way that they look to me, I have associations of racism for me. Anyway, I don't know the situation. Anyway, she's talking about her father was in prison, and her mom was suffering from substance abuse problems, and that led to a lot of inconsistent parenting, a lot of abandonment. It's a really common story for a lot of people that I've worked with. Drug addiction. And the drug addiction often, as you'll know that I talk about, is often a compensation for trauma. So when we're talking about a situation like this, we're not just talking about someone suffering from substance abuse. We're talking about the very real possibility that the mom and the father suffered from a lot of traumas growing up that led them to need substances as adults to cope with their untreated complex traumas. And then that led to parenting problems of Memphis.
So we did not always have a roof over our heads. At 11, I was taken away, and I was in 12 different foster homes till I was 19.
Yeah, this is a story I've had so many clients like this, where they have that kind of background. It's a very frequent background. It's a lot more common than a lot of people want to admit and realize. There are so many families ravaged by trauma and substance abuse that leaves children wards of the state, if you will, and then they become foster children. And being in the foster care system is a crapshoot, because some foster home, people there's sometimes a cultural prejudice against foster homes that I find interesting. I worked with a lot of foster parents, and they were all sufficient. Let me just put it that way. They were all at least adequate. And then there were some foster homes who the parents were saints. The amount of stuff, because of course, when you're 12 and you have all that abandonment, you have a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of anger, and a lot of distrust, and you might take it out on your foster parents and rebel and this kind of thing. And so these foster parents often have to put up with a lot. And so now, are there cases of foster parents who were abusive? 100%. I never worked with those people, and I don't know the prevalence of it, but I feel like those reports are talked about much more often. It's not often that you'll read a newspaper article about, foster parent that doesn't abuse the kids and is adequate as a parent. There's just not a sensationalized story that people talk about. What you hear about are the bad apples usually. But anyway, so I worked with a lot of foster parents, and it wasn't uncommon that you'd have a kid come into the foster home and then, for various reasons, move from foster home to foster home. Sometimes it was because the foster home wanted to downsize a little bit, or the foster home would adopt someone, and that would mean one of the foster kids would have to move out. Another possibility is misbehavior. You have a foster kid who is creating a lot of problems behaviorally, which makes total sense given their background, right? And the foster parent says, I can't have this person in my house anymore. It's completely ruining my home and my family life. All these other kids are behaving themselves. This other kid's just got to go, which is more abandonment. And I was there with some of these kids. And talk about swimming upstream as a therapist. I mean, trying to help them when they've already been through so much attachment injury growing up and so much trauma. And because it's not uncommon for someone with her background to not only have abandonment, but also have like severe abuse. because when you're in the throes of drug addiction, you sometimes invite predators into the home, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I don't know. But so I would be treating these kids and trying to help them to just get stable, and baseline, what I'm hoping is that they can get their behaviors below a threshold so they can stay in a foster home long enough and maybe even get adopted so they can begin the healing process that begins with secure attachments with someone. And that was always my hope, is like, forget about school, forget about any of that stuff. I mean, that stuff is fine, but baseline, this person has to have a secure attachment with a caregiver that they've never had. I cannot provide that. I'm only here once or twice a week. The closest person to them is their foster parent. And if that person can be that person, then so be it. But in order for that to work, the foster kid has to behave themselves. And they have to not blow out of every foster home. I don't know if that's the case for her. There's also scenarios where you, like I said, will just be carted around for administrative reasons. So, I don't know what's going on, but it's just heartbreaking. And she seems, Memphis, very well put together. She has a career. She seems very level-headed and pretty mature and self-confident, but I have to imagine that unless she's been through 20 years of therapy, there's some attachment injuries down there that are going to show itself. Even they might have already shown themselves.
But the past is very difficult for my mother to talk about. I think she feels this sense of guilt, and so she rather repress those memories because that's her coping mechanism.
Okay, so it sounds like which makes total sense. I mean, just imagine for yourself that on every metric you have failed as a parent, that your child was carted around to various different foster homes, and who knows what other kinds of markers of failure as a parent that the mom has in her mind. And I've worked with parents like this too, and one of the biggest things is letting them off the hook and just being like, look, yeah, we can agree that there's mistakes have been made, but shame is not the road to recovery, and denial is not the road to recovery, which is denial because of shame. We have to start reconciling with what really happened. If you really want to have a good bond with your daughter, you're going to have to accept that she's going to want to talk about it sometimes and might even want some apologies or just some recognition or something. But it's so hard to be able to cope with that. And you want to do it slowly, of course. But she's saying that her mom is in denial about what happened in the past because, Memphis seems very caring and very compassionate towards her mom. So given because if she was in one foster home, then I'd be like, well, maybe someone did make up for it. And another possibility is that she had grandparents. Sometimes that will help. Even though you're in various different foster homes, you have that frequent weekend hang time with your grandparents. So I'm just looking for some reason, because she seems stable and she seems emotionally mature. And I just wonder how she got there given her background. Or if she holds it together very efficiently, but then at times, the pain comes through.
I don't understand. Even in my addiction, I still made sure that you had everything.
I don't think that I had everything that I need.
Yeah, wow. Even in my addiction, I made sure you had everything, except for a mother. I mean, I don't want to be mean to Memphis's mom, but and Memphis is being like, yeah, I don't know if okay. It's like, what do you mean I had everything? I had a bed, I had toys. Do you think that's what was important to me as a child? I needed stability. I needed non-abandonment. I needed hugs and security and assuredness that you're okay and not to be carted woo. Now, I don't want to speak for Memphis. I don't know the situation. I don't want to shame the mom, but like I said earlier, shame it's not going to help. But if I were Memphis, I'd be like, What?
I needed you and you were unavailable.
Yeah, I had things going on. I was a single mom. Your father wasn't in the picture, and I was young.
Totally, but that doesn't preclude your ability to, again, I'm guessing that it was trauma-based. People don't just wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to become addicted to something and abandon my children. Like, people don't make those choices, very often. It happens sometimes, but not usually. So it's not like it was a choice that she made. But again, if I were Memphis, I'd be like, really? Because Memphis is a single mom. And she is there for her kids. Again, we don't want to shame the mom, but it would be nice if the mom would say something like, look, I'm terribly ashamed of what happened. I'm so sorry. Every day I live with this shame, and I'm just so sorry that I let you down. I could tell you the factors that led to being an abandoning parent to you, but it doesn't take away that it happened. I think Memphis deserves that. And the mom deserves to come from a non-shameful place in which she has support around her, people who are, providing therapy for her, maybe other mothers who have been through this situation. It sounds like maybe the mom is, and it's possible that the mom even has been told by her Narcotics Anonymous group or her treatment people, who knows, to not go into shame and to not go there, because if she goes there, it will provoke a relapse or something. Who knows what's going on with her. But if I were Memphis, I'd be like, what? Yeah, you were a single mom. Your husband wasn't there for you, and you were young. But that doesn't deny the fact that I was completely abandoned my entire childhood, and I went from foster home to foster home. Like, do you not acknowledge that? But this is, as a family therapist, I've been with families like this and situations like this, and the way I lay it out is like there's a lifetime of conversations that have to occur, and we're going to begin that process, and we're not going to solve it right away. And so we could say that right now they're at a particular phase of the development of their conversations. They're having a conversation, which is more than a lot of people have. And I would expect over years this conversation to evolve, where the mom would be able to say, I am so sorry about what happened, and I am so ashamed. And then Memphis could say, like, well, thanks for saying that. It was pretty rough. But, I know that it was tough for you and you didn't do it on purpose, that kind of talk.
I just think sometimes my childhood does play a part in how I need to be with a man to feel secure.
Okay, good. So she's drawing those connections, which I would imagine is absolutely true. That because of her childhood of abandonment, that she feels like she has to be with a man to feel secure. Now, what I'll say is that it's totally normal and healthy for all of us to recognize our dependency on other people. That, yes, because there's this notion of like, well, you got to love yourself before you can love other people. And it depends on what people mean by that. But the road to health is through relationships. The road to emotional regulation and self-love is through being loved. The road to emotional regulation is people being nice to us and us feeling secure, not only in our relationships, but also in our society, to feel like people, like we're safe. And you can't do that on your own. You have to do that through relationships. We're social creatures, clearly. I mean, we literally watch TV shows, reality TV shows about other people's lives because we're obsessed with other humans. And we're obsessed with other humans because we're extremely social. And we depend on other people. And so on one level, I would hope that she could have corrective experiences with relationships, not just with men romantically, but with any relationship, maybe even her mom, so that she can feel secure and feel like she matters and feels like she's safe. But yeah, so she's saying that, because of my childhood, I have this, I think what she's saying is an overdependence on security from romantic partners.
I realize my decision to marry Hamza is filling a hole in my heart that I've had my whole life. I'm ready to have a complete family. I just hope that for me and my kids, the decision that I am making is the right one.
All right, well, if you didn't know it, we have merch and Cameo. So you can buy merch clicking the link below, and you can also hire me to do a cameo, a happy holidays or a Merry Christmas or a happy birthday or a happy anniversary or just a shout out to someone. It's kind of fun. I pretty much do it every day. There's usually one cameo a day that I'll do, and it's just kind of a fun way to, I don't know, it feels interactive. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.